y'all remember, all y'all were there for the presentation, right? Kind of ish.
Yeah.
Okay. We're going to be talking about some of the same things that I said in the presentation, and this is going to be looking at a wildfire structure assessment. So the thing about this that kind of goes out of the normal realm of forestry is whenever you're doing a single structure assessment, you can be super picky. Every little thing, just point it out, because again, whenever you're doing this in the real world, you're really looking for potential. So if there is one spot on this lower window that has a couple leaves stuck in it, go ahead and mark that down, even though in reality it's still a low risk. It's something for them as the homeowner that they can keep an eye out for on a day-to-day basis. You know what I'm saying? So it's not all like that leaf is going to start a fire, as much as that's a collection point that they keep their eye on to keep it cleaned out. So again, some of the things we'll look at might seem a bit redundant and, you know, kind of nitpicky, but that's the good thing about this. So whenever you're looking at a structure, the sketch, as minimal as you want to do it, I mean, you know, we don't need any Van Goghs to say, hey, this is exactly what the front of the house looked like. I usually just draw a four-sided box, and depending on what it is, like this one's got a porch on the front, I'll draw a porch so that it's on the front. And I do the sides, as you can see down here, side A, B, C, and D. And I usually just mark that around, and as you go around, you know which side you're talking about. Make sense? All right. So you always look, like I was saying with the presentation, you always look at the home first. That's the center of the home ignition zone, you know, like the bullseye. That's what we're trying to protect. So whenever you're doing an individual structure, you want to look at everything from the siding, the roof, the gutters, windows, all the way down to the ground. See any openings, any place that litter could collect. Because if litter collects somewhere, what will happen during a wildfire? Embers, right? Because again, that's how structures burn, is from embers. Most of the time, it's the embers that come and land on the structure and start a fire right next to it. So this one's pretty basic. There isn't a whole lot. I walked around both of these buildings. There's not a whole lot, but there's something we can be a little nitpicky with. So if you want to step on closer, we can look at the structure of what stands out to you as a good collection point for fuel under the pool. Exactly. Fortunately for them, it's brick and concrete. But you could imagine if this was a wooden deck, right? That could be a potential hazard. So all those little places around in the stairwells, all these little places over here, you could collect a little bit of fuel, right? They have concrete, even a concrete bottom to the porch, which is great. But what are these right here? Wood. What about that right there? Leaves underneath the front edge, right? So again, that's a collection point. Like I said, you get to be nitpicky, but just take a blower, blow those leaves out every couple weeks, or especially if it's coming fire season, you'll reduce that risk. Something that easy. And then looking at these pillars, I noticed this. This is a wooden pillar. Then you got a gap right here. So again, that's a small gap, and that's still a low probability that embers would land in that. It'd take a pretty significant wind with a good push, pushing embers straight towards the bottom of that. But again, looking at a full assessment, it's a possibility. You know, you're looking for that what if, because, you know, with the whole Firewise side of things, it's always lessons learned. You know, these are things that they've gone back and looked at. So there's been stories of something very similar to this in a real wildfire situation where they go by past the house and they look at it and everything's fine. Then they come back and for some reason a corner of the house is on fire that nobody even saw anything wrong with. And it's going to be something as small as this where embers get up under there especially if there's fuel and litter underneath that crack. So whenever you're looking at the assessment, you want to look at the structure first. The siding, it's the old wood siding, but it's painted. It looks like it's in pretty good shape. So nothing dramatically stands out. I mean, you could make a mention, something about like the window seals and the shutters, making sure to keep debris cleaned. Again, you're given over information. So looking at this one from the front, you really don't have anything. And then you move down to the fuels within 10 feet. Anybody want to make a comment about the fuels within 10 feet? A few leaves, but it's mostly grass. Most of it goes up to a non-flammable surface because most of it's got this brick or stucco-ish wall, so that's non-flammable. So that's relatively low, right? You don't really have that much of a problem there, but again, like you're saying, nitpicking, keep those leaves just kind of from those collection points is really the main thing we're looking at. Then, again, just from the front, beyond, got an oak tree here, which is no threat. So the front of the house, extending out, really isn't that big of a deal, right? Y'all kind of agree with that? Okay, so the other risk factor on this one, of course, the main thing you want to watch out for is that underneath. That significant open area where everything can kind of blow in there, so you want to keep that cleaned out. And then recommendations for side A. Anybody want to take a stab? Some things we just talked about.
Would you include the uncovered gutters?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's one thing to keep out. I mean, without seeing a whole bunch of litter in there, you kind of assume, but again, that's one of those mentions. It's like keep the gutters clean. If you see, pine straw sticking out, you can say there's litter in the gutters.
Right.
I can't really see that here, but I'm sure there's something up there. So you can just say try to keep that clean, or if money's no object, litter guards would be great, and it would just be something they didn't have to worry about.
Okay.
Anything else? One thing we talked about. As you're going around the house, you got the reason for the recommendations on this side is just to keep your mind busy because you're going to look at 3 other sides. So one of my biggest concerns would be this little hole at the front of the wooden step. Because if the bottom step catches, what happens to the second step? It just continues, right? So again, out of pretty much the front, that's the biggest concern, and that'll take 2 seconds to keep it cleaned out, right? So the front of this is pretty good, right? And your siding on houses, a lot of times, they'll be similar, but with new construction today, you'll have a lot of times where they'll have a brick front with vinyl siding on the side and back, things like that. So again, I know it's redundant, but you just kind of keep that flow going. Glancing at this, what kind of stands out as potential? Wooden door, a little bit of gap at the bottom, right? Now again, it's clean right now, it's been painted, so again, that's low risk, but in the event you get some high winds, things like that, we don't know what's behind that door. They could have, I've seen houses, no lie, have like decades of old newspaper stored underneath their house, underneath their deck, so we don't know what's beyond that. So if there's a gap, you want to say, make sure you keep an eye on that gap, or potentially even close that gap off, because if embers go in there, now it's inside the structure where we don't know what is inside. On the structure itself, this side's pretty non-eventful. It's pretty good. High up, you got the same thing with the gutters. We can make a little note, say keep clean. Fuel within 10 feet of the structure, virtually non-existent, right? You got mowed grass all the way up to the edge with a little bit of litter beside the bricks. But again, with this wooden door, and I'd be kind of nitpicking in this area, but I do want to mention, because I actually did an assessment on this, and we encourage them to install these screens, right? But if you look right here, there's a lot of litter that's kind of gathering down in that. So again, you can install this stuff and make it kind of fireproof, if you will, at first glance, but still it's the maintenance of it and keeping all that up and keeping it clean. So that's one thing I would mention about this structure on this side. The fuels, like I said, low, and then whenever you get beyond, we start getting to some bushes, right? So these being the non-waxy kind of flammable bushes, they're not that in that category, so these are lower risk, you know. And over here on the corner, you got some bushes that are kind of close to the structure off of this back corner. So while you're on this side, I would make a note of bushes close to the corner, right? Because the tops of those bushes are reaching out close to the structure and they're within that 10-foot zone. But those are non-flammable, well, not non-flammable, low flammability bushes because they aren't really waxy. So you can imagine if that was a wax myrtle or something like that, then that could potentially cause an issue for the corner of this house. So again, it's not the worst case scenario, but they do have vegetation, even though it's lower on the scale of flammability. Anything else? Okay. Come on to the back. Looking at this side, you got similar, but still a little different than the front. But again, the porch, very vulnerable area. The separation from the ground to the bottom of the porch is a whole lot better than a lot of scenarios, which y'all see in a few. So them keeping that clean underneath from vegetation would help, but since I don't have bushes or anything like that stored up underneath that, there's low likelihood that even leaves and litter like that would ignite underneath and cause any damage to the porch because there's a good bit of separation. You know, there's several feet. So if this was down on the ground, you'd have a different situation, which again, y'all see whenever you go to visit. But looking up top, you got a lot more design feature with the dormer windows. So again, I'm sure it's not, but some of those areas can collect a lot of fuel, so you're gonna watch out for areas like that. And all those are open, even though it looks like they have screening, which will keep that fuel and debris out.
Over here at the big house. Yeah. Alright. Sorry.
Oh no, you're good. You're good. So all that's screened in, but you could imagine if it wasn't, embers could easily gain access to that with those open windows, right? Anything else as far as fuel for the close 10 feet? Kind of the same thing as the other side. Got a little bit in this corner, kind of bumping to that 10-foot edge. So again, I'll say no vegetation is non-flammable. In a severe drought, you know, you will have, most bushes will burn. So whenever you look at the smaller group over here, and then this one with a whole bunch of mix of just crap in it, you got wax myrtle mixed in there too. So again, this little bush conglomeration, it would be good to thin some of that out and at least prune it back to get it away from the house. And again, you have to look at structure. So for this one right here on the state park, you can imagine how important this structure is to the whole park system, right? If this house was to burn down, they couldn't really build it back, you know, because it's historical. So again, you have to look at all factors whenever you're looking at a structure. So thinning this out would be probably my top priority for the back here, and just kind of getting some more of that separation, because again, this is all old wood with some cracks and things like that around the window sills. So any kind of embers landing could make its way into areas where we can't even really see. Y'all pretty good on that side? Okay, looking on this side, on the structure itself, you kind of got the same thing. Another wooden door, other small windows with that same screening. So wherever that fuel could build up. This side is really uneventful as far as Firewise, just because it's pretty much the structure itself. But again, being nitpicky, that is wooden shutters with wooden siding. So I've seen structures like this that would have a bird build a nest in one of those corners. And what's the bird's nest made out of? Flammable stuff, right? So if embers land on the bird nest, it can ignite it as well. So again, just keeping all that kind of stuff cleaned away, that's pretty much what we're looking at on a structure assessment basis. So now that we've done all four sides, the main thing I look at is the overall remarks. And this, you know, in the real world, this would be the section that you really want to capture what the risk is, but then also ways for them to mitigate that risk as homeowners. So again, whenever we're going back to the whole building, what would be some of the overall remarks that we would want to make?
Trim those bushes.
Trim those bushes, absolutely. And why do we want to do that?
It's a mess.
Yeah, this is a mess, yeah. But it's also flammable, right? We got that mixture in there, got a lot of wax myrtles, things like that, that are thick. If it was to ignite, could create a bunch of radiant heat, and it's close enough to the house with it being flammable siding, it could cause damage. Anything else?
Keep the gutters clean.
Keep the gutters clean, absolutely. That goes on every assessment that I write. Keep gutters clean, keep roof free of debris, just because that's your most vulnerable area. Anything else?
Those small windows clean.
Keep small windows clean, absolutely. They spent the money to install the screen, right, to keep embers from getting inside. But now, because there's a little bit of slack at the bottom, there's leaves in between the screen and the wood frame of the window. Anything else from the front?
Keep under the porch.
Under the porch, right there, that very front corner where it's closest to the ground, underneath those wooden steps, because all that would be like a wick on a candle, burn all the way in there. There goes your staircase. And again, this is assuming a lot, but we actually had, from my presentation, you know, one of the significant fires for Horry County was the Windsor Green fire, and it was just an apartment complex that burned, and it happened in about an hour, and 109 units burned up. And the main thing was the wooden staircases, as you've probably seen in a bunch of condo apartment style places. The wooden staircase goes straight up to where people are living. So you can imagine the pine straw all the way up underneath and around the building, underneath those wooden staircases. As people are trying to run down, the staircases are starting to ignite. You can imagine kind of what kind of scenario that creates, right? So again, I know it's being nitpicky, but it could be a big situation. And you can imagine if this was a home and a structure with a wildfire and they're trying to run off the front porch and the stairs are on fire. They can't really get out. They'd have to jump off the side. Whereas here, not a huge situation, but if you're on the third floor, it might be a different story. Okay, y'all good?
Okay.